The moment that message dropped, everything shattered. Not quietly, not politely. No, this was a calculated detonation, wrapped in royal language so cold, so precise, it felt like a legal weapon disguised as a sentence. The welfare of Archie and Lilibet is non-negotiable. That line didn't just warn, it accused. It signaled that something had already gone too far, something dangerous, something irreversible unless stopped immediately. And then came the line no one was prepared for. Prince William acted at the request of his brother. Pause. Because that one sentence didn't just raise eyebrows, it rewrote the entire narrative people thought they understood. These were two brothers who hadn't just drifted apart, they had detonated their relationship years ago. Silence, distance, public jabs, private wounds. And suddenly, this cooperation, urgency, unity, it didn't make sense until you looked beneath the surface. Because behind that statement was a secret plan, not rumored, not speculative, a plan with documents, signatures, money trails, flight bookings, a plan so advanced it had already crossed from idea into execution. They called it Project Mirror. And if it had succeeded, two children would have quietly disappeared into a system no one could easily reverse. This wasn't about drama anymore. This was about jurisdiction, control, and time running out. The unraveling didn't begin in a courtroom. It began with a voice message, late at night, left by someone who wasn't supposed to be part of the plan at all. Doria Ragland. She had seen something she shouldn't have. Documents tucked away, flight itineraries, notarized guardianship papers. And when the reality hit her, when the pieces aligned, she didn't hesitate. The message she left wasn't calm. It wasn't measured. It was urgent, almost panicked, because what she had discovered wasn't just travel. It was relocation. Los Angeles to Doha, tourist visas, a temporary host family arranged through a private entity, residency applications already mapped out, a timeline that stretched months ahead. And here's the detail that turns this from shocking to devastating. Harry didn't know. No discussion, no agreement, no consent. Imagine that moment, the realization creeping in, the paperwork confirming it, the understanding that something involving your children had been designed, finalized, and you were the last to find out. People close to him described it as suffocating, like the air had been pulled out of the room before he even knew he was gasping. His legal team didn't sugarcoat it. If those children boarded that plane, even once, everything would change. Jurisdiction wouldn't be his anymore. The legal system wouldn't be his anymore. Even enforcement of any future ruling, complicated, delayed, possibly impossible. He didn't have time for strategy. He had one move, and it was the one move no one expected him to make. He called William, not a lawyer, not a publicist, not a friend, his brother, the same brother he had spent years pushing away. The call lasted 43 minutes, no shouting. No reconciliation speeches, no emotional apologies, just facts, details, timelines, risks, and then silence. Because what Harry was really asking wasn't simple help. He was asking for the full force of an institution he had once walked away from to be turned towards stopping the mother of his children. That's not a request. That's a line you cross knowing you can never fully walk back. Two things shifted William. One was quiet, almost invisible. Catherine. Her words weren't dramatic. They weren't even loud, but they landed exactly where they needed to. If a frightened father cannot lean on his own brother, what hope do their children have? And just like that, the situation stopped being about history, about pride, about past arguments. It became about the future. The second shift was sharper, more instinctive. An image, a child, Archie, alone in a foreign place. No parents, no familiarity, no control. That image didn't sit well. It didn't fade. It locked in. Within 48 hours, William wasn't reacting anymore. He was executing. Multiple intelligence streams, financial tracing, aviation logs, internal leaks. Everything began aligning into a picture that was far more organized than anyone had assumed. This wasn't a last-minute idea. It had been building. Chartered flight patterns showed quiet reconnaissance trips months earlier. Financial activity hinted at something structured, something deliberate. And then came the blueprint, a 42-page document that laid out the entire operation in cold, professional detail. Every piece pointed to the same conclusion. Project Mirror was real. And it was close. The Doha route wasn't random. It was selected carefully. A jurisdiction outside certain international custody frameworks. A system that, once engaged, would be incredibly difficult to reverse. Temporary visas that could quietly become long-term presence. A host family positioned to make the transition seamless. Educational enrollment prepared in advance to create the appearance of normalcy. On paper, it looked clean, but underneath, flaws. Dangerous ones. Tourist visas had limits. Education restrictions existed. Healthcare their access wasn't guaranteed. And most critically, after a certain period, legal residency patterns could shift custody authority entirely. That meant one thing. Once the children crossed that line, bringing them back wouldn't just be difficult. It might become a battle no one could win. William didn't wait for that line to be crossed. At 6:30 in the morning, something moved. Fast, silent, precise. Accounts froze, multiple institutions, multiple countries, transactions halted mid-flow, assets locked, trademarks swept into escrow. It happened in seconds. The financial engine behind Project Mirror stopped breathing. And buried inside those transactions? Proof. A bridge loan, routed through layered entities, referencing a second phase tied directly to residency confirmation. Not speculation, not theory. Intent. Signed. Documented. Traceable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan already in motion. By the time the palace statement hit the public, the real action had already happened behind closed doors. Money was locked. Movement was blocked. Time was collapsing. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Harry stood still. Not relieved, not victorious, just drained. Because what he had set in motion had worked. But it had also done something else. It had turned the system against someone he once trusted completely. And that realization doesn't disappear just because the outcome was necessary. He reportedly said something that night, quietly, almost to himself. I never wanted it to be you against her, but that's exactly what it had become. Not by accident, not by misunderstanding, but by a series of decisions that had finally collided in one irreversible moment. And now, there was no going back. By the time the courtroom doors closed that morning, the story had already shifted from rumor to something far more dangerous. Evidence. Not whispers, not speculation. Proof. Because once those documents were laid out, once the money trail was projected onto that screen in front of everyone, the illusion that this was just exploratory planning didn't just weaken. It collapsed. The courtroom atmosphere changed in a way people later struggled to describe. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was worse than that. It was quiet. The kind of quiet where every movement feels heavy, where every word carries weight you can't take back. The judge, calm, composed, watching everything, was no longer just listening to arguments. She was watching a narrative unravel in real time. On one side, there was an attempt to frame everything as harmless. Future possibilities, travel flexibility, no binding commitments. But then came the numbers. Precise. Cold, unemotional, 1.1 million transferred, hundreds of thousands spent within days, private aviation retainers secured, and a portion of those costs hidden inside categories that had nothing to do with what they actually funded. That was the moment the air changed, because money doesn't lie. And in that room, the money was telling a very specific story, a story of preparation, a story of intent, a story of a plan that was no longer theoretical, it was operational. Then came the document, the one that people would talk about long after the hearing ended, the Pearl Guardian integration file. Not a draft, not an outline, a completed arrangement. It named the host family. It detailed the transition process. It described how two children would be integrated into a completely new environment without either parent physically present during that adjustment phase. And at the bottom of that document, a signature. Her signature. Clear, verified, undeniable. But there was something missing. And when the judge asked the question, the entire room leaned into it without realizing. Did the father sign this? Just one question. No emotion. No accusation. And the answer, no. That word didn't echo. It cracked. Because in that instant, the case stopped being about logistics. It became about trust and the absence of it. Everything after that felt different. Heavier. Slower. The courtroom wasn't just processing documents anymore. It was processing what those documents meant. A father discovering in public what had been planned in private. A mother sitting silently as her decisions were read aloud, line by line. Two realities colliding in front of a judge who now had to decide not just legality, but consequence. Harry had been sitting behind his legal team for hours, still, focused, trying to hold something together internally that had already started breaking. But when that document was read in full, when the details became impossible to ignore, something shifted. Observers noticed it immediately. The control slipped, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. He kept repeating something under his breath, the same question again and again. Why didn't she tell me? It wasn't anger. That's what made it worse. It was confusion. And confusion in moments like this cuts deeper than anger ever could. Because anger at least gives you direction. Confusion leaves you standing still while everything moves around you. And then came the moment no one had predicted. No one had even imagined. At 2:23 in the afternoon, he stood up, walked forward, and handed over a piece of paper. Handwritten, simple, no legal jargon, no crafted language, just a declaration. When the clerk read it aloud, the room didn't react immediately. It took a second, because what they had just heard didn't sound like strategy. It sounded like sacrifice. He was renouncing his title, not symbolically, not temporarily, completely. And the final line, that was the one that stayed. Henceforth, I answer only as father. 9 words. That's all it took. 9 words to cut through everything. Status, history, identity. 9 words that reframed the entire situation. Because suddenly, this wasn't a duke. This wasn't a public figure. This was a man choosing one role over all others. And in doing so, burning something behind him that could never fully be reclaimed. Across the room, there was no reaction at first. Just stillness. But then, the shift became visible. A change in expression. A loss of composure that couldn't be masked quickly enough, because that moment wasn't just about him. It reflected directly back on everything that had led them there. The judge recessed. 90 minutes. The next morning, a video appeared. No grand setting and no formal tone, just a room, natural light, children's drawings in the background, and a message that didn't mention courts or rulings or any of the chaos that had just unfolded. It talked about something simpler: routine, laughter, the certainty that parents return. That message spread faster than anything else had. Because after all the complexity, all the legal arguments, all the financial details, it brought everything back to something people understood instantly: children and what they need. Behind the scenes, the work didn't stop. Audits, investigations, reviews, numbers being checked, transactions being traced, every detail examined. Because once something like this breaks open, it doesn't close quickly. It lingers. It reshapes everything around it. For Harry, the path forward became clear in a way it hadn't been before. Not easy, just clear. Every decision measured against one question: does this help the children? If not, it waits. No shortcuts, no distractions, just a quiet, steady process of rebuilding something that had nearly been lost. And in a secured room inside a courthouse, 2 small passports sat locked away, still, untouched, waiting. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in a story like this isn't movement. It's the fact that something didn't move at all, that a line was drawn, and this time it held.